Please welcome the wonderful, the brilliant, Andy Hickl.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Andy Hickl. I'm from Vulcan in Seattle, and it's great to be on a sunny day here in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm going to start today by talking about a little bit about what we're doing at Vulcan to use the intersection of technology and how we're applying that to be able to save the planet. But when you use words like saving the planet, you're kind of reminded by this quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson's Twitter, where he said, when you're talking about saving the planet, you're not talking about saving the Earth. The Earth's going to be fine. It's been here for 4 billion years. Really what you're interested in saving is saving the inhabitants of the Earth, right? The plants and the animals that live here, the home team, so to speak. And things look pretty bad for the home teams right now. We're not talking about this one, right? This one did all right, the MLS Cup winners. And this one's going to win tonight, right, against the Clippers. We're talking about these guys, right? We heard Ted and Jake and everybody else talking about how elephant populations are in crisis. We're losing 3 to 4 elephants an hour every day, every week, every month. We're overfishing. Fishing is reached epidemic proportions as well. We're losing, humans are responsible for killing 10% of the world's shark population. You might say, hey, that might be a good start, but when you're losing that many apex predators from an ecosystem as fragile as the oceans right now, bad things can happen. And we're not doing well by fish either, right? So we are, 40% of our global fishing stocks are overexploited right now. We are not in good paths, in terms of what our oceans are by themselves are not in good health right now, and the ecosystems that are supported by the oceans aren't in good health as well. And as you know, you don't need me to tell you that 2016 is the hottest year on record, right? Not in the last 50 years, the last 100 years, but forever, right? And we're only 4 months into it. So what's next? Hopefully we don't have to deal with these guys coming down. Although I hear presidential candidates talking about building a wall, and that might be a good idea. So the message I'm going to have is that there is some hope. We are not necessarily powerless. And when I talk about we, I'm not talking about we at Vulcan Technology. I'm talking about we, everybody here in this room, because you have a special charge. Because what we do right now as a tech community, or what we do as a social community, will impact our planet's ability to sustain life as we know it over the next for the foreseeable future. And the moment to act is now, right? What we do in the next 20 years is really going to be what's impactful. So for the first time in recorded human history, we have the ability to know what's going on, right? We have incredible advances in sensors, incredible advances in computing, incredible advances in our ability to make sense of big data. We can know how bad the elephant crisis is here from Portland or from Seattle and try to understand that. And we can actually take action from here or over there if we want to. And we can actually do something good, right? We can mobilize large communities in ways we haven't. We can mobilize funding in a way that we haven't. And we can mobilize data and be more transparent about the way we actually interact with data more than we can ever have. So the old way has served us well, right? I'm going to call this big data 1.0. Everybody probably knows a data scientist or two, or you pose as a data scientist on LinkedIn to be able to get those recruiters to call you. This is the kind of the old and busted kind of way where we gather data in synchronous or asynchronous fashion. We understand, we try to track and see how it looks. The data that we gathered today looks different than the data we gathered last year. We try to measure some sort of effectiveness, and then we encourage action. And I'm going to give short shrift to encouraging action, but I don't mean to. Right? Being able to take full effect of that data, that knowledge that we extract from data, and actually use that to engage people in a meaningful fashion, that's meaningful work. It's not necessarily something core to what I do, but something I have a lot of respect and admiration for. So the calculus is pretty simple here. More data plus more people increases increased awareness, which drives us to the outcomes we're ultimately looking for. But the simple fact of the matter is this isn't enough anymore, right? Anybody can create data. Right, we can go out on the web and find 50 different elephant data sets. We can find great, Google has now, or Microsoft has made a tremendous number of resources available to all of us, and we can download with a few clicks everything we need to download. So what we're looking at, we need a better quality or a better caliber of data set, right? And data sets necessarily need to be recent, right? We can't work on 5-year-old data anymore, not given the way things are changing in the world. We need to work on unbiased data sets. Right? Its sampling bias is pernicious, right? It's everywhere. But just because we understand what the elephant crisis looks like in Botswana doesn't necessarily give us the information that would allow us to be able to predict proof positive what's going on in a neighboring country like Angola or Tanzania. And it has to be comprehensive, right? We really need to account for sampling bias. We need to understand exactly what's going on in as many corners of the world as we possibly can reach. It also needs to be incredibly precise. 2 years ago, at the height of the Ebola crisis, many of us baffled at the fact that countries like Sierra Leone or Liberia didn't necessarily know how many dead bodies that they were dealing with, or they had to revise the number of dead bodies that they were dealing with, and they were off by hundreds. And so people who were building models, fast and furious, were having to deal with the fact that they couldn't necessarily trust the data that was coming in. And most importantly, data needs to be tied to a theory of engagement. It's not enough just to collect that data. You actually have to understand who gets it, who can see with it, who can work with it, and what are they ultimately going to do when they draw conclusions. So what I'm here to talk about is the better way, right? A better way. And this is probably one possible solution to, one possible approach to dealing with data. And it's fostered by, or encouraged or facilitated by some recent breakthroughs that are being made in AI, in terms of hardware sensing, in terms of autonomy and robotics. And we'll get to talk about some of this fun stuff and some of the projects that we're doing at Vulcan Technology that incorporate all of these. But the better way, and one way that I kind of characterize the work in my lab, is we use AI to integrate collections, analysis, and engagement, right? So we use a data-informed approach to be able to figure out where to go look for data, to then use that same kind of AI-inspired approach to figure out what that data ultimately means, and then use that to be able to figure out what we're going to do next, right? And if you'll bear with me, I'm going to call this Big Data 2.0, right? But this is the big loop that we're ultimately looking for. We want to reduce the time between collections and analysis, right, in which we have to be efficient, we have to use connected devices, we have to use connected sensors, and bring that data back to the processing center or the analyst as soon as possible. We need to have robust and rich and automated analysis techniques. We need to understand the complex scenarios and their likely outcomes. We need to take those raw numbers, those raw ones and zeros, and turn that into knowledge that we can do something about. And then we need to take that knowledge and use that to inform and to act. And we'll talk about, this may seem theoretical, but we're going to talk about some of the projects where we actually put this into practice and we can see this reified. And like I said before, technology is leading the way. We are doing things now in 2016 that we couldn't do in 2014, right? And that's an incredible pace, right? That should make you stand up and wonder and go, hey, what else can I do? What else am I working on now that necessarily could provide this kind of impact going forward? Data collection is driven by the fact that we have we're getting more and more connectivity even in the developing world. We have novel computing platforms, right? I can put almost 8,000 CUDA cores, GPUs, on a drone and fly it around Botswana. I don't necessarily have to deal with Odroids or smaller computers. I can actually take things that were supercomputers 2 years ago and stick them on vehicles that that I'm fully expecting not to necessarily get back in the interest of in the event of a catastrophe. We heard about IoT this morning. We've got more and more connected devices, more and more low-cost sensors. The breakthroughs that you've seen, I'm sure you've seen the popular press about deep learning, but the work that we're doing now with supervised learning, whether it's in terms of extracting knowledge from continuous data or in terms of computer vision, the ability to use people anywhere in the world to be able to create training data, that's allowing us to do rapid analysis in a way that we couldn't do 2 or 3 years ago. And not to give it short shrift, but a lot of hype about AI and robotics. Yes, we're taking baby steps in that area, and the knowledge that we're getting from data is allowing us to exploit those technologies that with a real sense. But user experience is also important. You can't underestimate the role of human factors. Okay, better sensors are leading the way. We saw the role of smartphones in terms of the Ebola crisis 2 years ago, in terms of collecting data and making that available to anyone in the world who wanted to know what was going on. Vulcan Technology is working with the US government to be able to sponsor the Smart City Challenge, to be able to use sensors in a variety of ways to be able to learn about, build smarter cities that can help us be more efficient in lots of different ways. My colleague Ted this morning talked about the way we're using cameras undersea to be able to understand the interplay between sharks and reefs. Computer vision and machine learning is important as well. We talked a lot about trying to find elephants in the wild. We saw the folks from Conservation Metrics talk about how they're using deep learning. I like to throw this slide up because you can't necessarily see the elephants, but computer vision can. If you're looking for where boats are operating illegally and fishing illegally, you can see the computer vision systems also help them there. We're taking baby steps in robotics, and what I'll talk about here is what my team, this is actually a picture from a week ago, my team in Botswana. This is the drone they've been flying On that drone is a high-powered camera and a GPU board, and that drone can actually go out and find elephants, fly around them, basically count all the elephants without anyone standing at the sticks. Right? This is incredible because it means that we don't necessarily have to train human pilots to be able to operate these robots in the field, which allows us to mean that we can increase the area of coverage and get back to that comprehensive, unbiased data sets that we all need. So I'll leave you with this. There aren't any excuses anymore, not for you. You're too good. The stakes are higher than ever. We don't need to emphasize this even more, although we will. But you have skills, and you are needed. I'm proud of what we do at Vulcan Technology. And if you want to learn more about what we do at Vulcan Technology, we're sponsoring a happy hour from 4 to 6, and you can come talk to me afterwards about some of the details there. But I'm proud of what we do at Vulcan Technology on an everyday basis because we use these technologies and these skills, and we're no different than many of you out there in the audience. We're JavaScript programmers and learning experts and people who write code in Java or build systems based on Hadoop and all the other things that we're all familiar with. But on a daily basis, we get to help guys like this guy, or guys like that guy, or sometimes even guys like him. It's a big universe. There's plenty for all of us to do. And so all I ask is that you do something. Do something good. Thanks so much.
Hi, everybody. Andy, thank you for that presentation. I'm Jeff Wishney. I'm the Senior Director of Program Technology at Mercy Corps. If you're not familiar with us, we're your neighborhood international NGO. We're just down by Saturday Market. We work in about 40 different countries, about 4,000 people, and we've done some nice work with Vulcan.
Yeah.
So, listening to your talk, one of the things that struck me was in that cycle, the Big Data 2.0 cycle, you've got the kind of automated analysis piece.
Right.
And one of the big questions that I always have in the work that we do is we do a lot of work to try to understand what our impact is. But it's very, very hard to piece apart what part of the impact our work provided. Yeah. So an example, Vulcan and Mercy Corps both did a lot of work on the Ebola crisis. And for a long time, nobody was doing anything. And then these models came out of CDC saying we might hit hundreds of thousands or millions of infections. Right. And then all of a sudden, everybody raced in. And the local governments, the UN, NGOs, private sector, everybody was there throwing everything at it. And the infection rate went down and got to zero infection. But what of everything that was done worked? We did a lot of work, and we have numbers about we reached these many communities, for example, trained a certain number of people. But can the kind of tools you're working on work on that, help address that problem of additionality or piecing apart which interventions in a complex system are actually having impact?
I don't think we're there yet. I mean, there are people who are quick to tell us that we're most likely, all of us are living in a simulation of some other alien simulation of the universe. And I don't think we're there yet. And I don't think it necessarily, funders and sponsors really want us to be able to answer those questions and say, really, what good did the dollars that I gave you ultimately bought you? I think what a better approach at this point is to really start with the questions that you're looking to answer defined up front, right? One of the things that we look at, is not necessarily how can drones or the application of drones or one piece of technology or whatever end the poaching crisis of elephants. A better question is, what can the specific application of this technology do to be able to impact this one specific area? And if you can understand the impact on a specific area, then you can aggregate that into a larger and larger response.
I was hoping you would say yes, and then I would just give you a call later. You also brought up the point of the quality of the data and the role of humans in that process. And you're implying that one of the ways that we clean up the data is by taking humans out of the system with things like automated sensors. What do you think are the key ways that we clean up that data?
Yeah, I think I'd be happy with reducing time, effort, and cost at this point. And humans are fallible, and I think we've gotten real good over the last 25 years in building statistical techniques that allow us to understand exactly how fallible typical humans are. But the the goal for us in terms of when you create a data set now is to be much more comprehensive than we've been in the past. And so whether that's exploiting automation or annotation to be able to do, basically save humans for some high value tasks, that's one way to do it. One thing I'm really fond of right now is a group, and I'll give them a plug, is a group called Samasource, which is a 501c3. It's out of San Francisco, and they use people in developing countries who are connected to the internet to be able to do annotations. And they have annotated elephant data for us. They annotate data for Google and Zillow and a variety of other companies. But they are really excellent in terms of leveraging people who wouldn't necessarily be working in other ways to be able to provide this kind of knowledge resources that can be used at very low cost and high reliability.
It reminds me a little bit of what the OpenStreetMap team did after the Haiti earthquake.
That's right.
Where they used they crowdsourced globally people to trace satellite imagery to do the post-Haiti map, the post-earthquake maps, and then used Haitians living in the diaspora to label everything.
That's right.
And the people in the crisis situation focused on the crisis, and all the data was provided externally. So I want to ask you the Skynet question.
Okay.
So you've got that nice loop, and it seems like, thinking of the example of the elephant tracking drones or the anti-poaching drones, that a lot of that is about targeting the efforts of people so that they can be more effective. They know there are problems in this one area, you dispatch rangers there.
That's right.
Well, at what point does that not need to be mediated by people anymore? At what point do the drones take action?
Well, I think there is, it played out to, its logical or absurd conclusion. We were worried about, too much automation could lead to something like Skynet. And there's a lot of questions in terms of, how do you build good judgment into these systems? I think the interesting, that's a fallacy, because we think about, well, just a cascade of all these local judgments could lead to something that has, own free kind of, take its own initiative or have its own kind of free will. Really, where we're dealing with most of the problems we deal with are just in terms of local judgments, right? So should I turn left or should I turn right? Should I go after that elephant or should I go after that elephant? They talk about, we're going to run into these kinds of problems all over the place, right? We talk about the self-driving cars and the creepy trolley problem, right? This is a question of, if an automated system could save one person or save three people, ultimately what does it save? Well, it saves three people. If it has a choice between saving one person each, how do you necessarily build in enough good judgment into the system to be able to make it understand that? We're not worried about that at this point. What we're worried about is deployments that are robust enough to be able to reduce the complexity of this, of the training that somebody has to go through to be able to use these tools effectively.
You mentioned human factors, and that's very important to me in my work. I work with our field teams of about 3,000, 3,500 people worldwide, and these people are great at their work, but they're not necessarily highly technically savvy.
Right.
They certainly don't have the skills to code up some computer vision transforms to take raw satellite images and identify elephants in it.
Right.
So, when you talk about human factors, in what ways are you working to make these tools accessible to non-technical people?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for us in the short term is sustainability, right? We don't want to be an organization that deploys a high-tech solution into an area and then finds out 6 months later it's not being used because people didn't understand how to debug it or people didn't understand exactly what they were being given. I think we think a lot about, at Vulcan, we think a lot about what's the minimal experience that allows people to provide maximal utility, or the utility that they need to do a job. We talked initially when we talked about deploying drones that could count elephants, we wanted a smartphone interface, right? You touch the button elephant and you point the phone in the direction that you necessarily need to go. I think one of the open challenges for all of us in terms of technology development, is really understanding our users. And understanding what their real pain points are. So one of the things that my group at Vulcan Technology really works hard on is understanding the customer's needs and understands their ability to kind of grok technology in one way or another.
You reminded me of a project I did where there's a school in rural Uganda was computerized and giving computer-based lessons, and their printer was broken for 6 months. And we finally, it was very remote, we finally got a local technician to go out, and it was a paper jam.
Oh, jeez.
But the reality is, if you've never dealt with a printer, and it's a very expensive piece of equipment that you've been told is very valuable, how do you clear a paper jam? you pull a printer apart, right? You pull everything out of it. This is a terrifying thing.
Yeah.
So we tried to redo the lessons plan so they didn't need printers. One more opportunity for the audience. There we go.
All right.
Hi. There's been a lot of talk about sort of the smartphone being the forget the exact phrase, the democratization of information. Steve Jobs and someone in China might be using the exact same iPhone or other device, and this has allowed, talking about the Rwanda example, people are able to map crises and finally we have these new input mechanism. Do you know, or do you have any opinions on what the next sort of layer of that or next advancement of that may be, whether it's a new sort of model of something in AR, VR, or something else?
I think you have a better answer to this than I do.
We were actually talking about this a little bit in the green room ahead of time. What I would say is the smartphone revolution is not over. It's just begun. And the big challenge that we have ahead of us is that even though the devices are incredibly functional and quite cheap to the point that you'll see farmers and herders, people who are generally the poorest in the world with smartphones, they're not actually connected to the internet. They're using them as iPods. They're copying music onto them with SD cards, etc. And that's because while you might be able to come up with $50 or $20 buying a used one to buy a very useful device like a phone, you can't pay $40 a month when you're earning the equivalent of $1 a day for your internet service. And so really the next step in the smartphone revolution is to let people use these phones as internet devices the way we do here. And that's going to be, there's some technology challenge in it, but a lot of it is business. It's getting the cost down. And I'm not, maybe you want to talk to what's after that.
Yeah, I think we really don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of, somebody was talking to me over the weekend about, augmented reality has a lot of promise. We're excited about, marking everything up, and you see Magic Leap and HoloLens raise a lot of money and attract a lot of hype, but you really have to ask yourself what the target market is for some of those technologies. It's all well and good to dream about having an AR headset, but do you really want to wear one and wear it to the happy hour that we're having right after this? Maybe not. Maybe things will change. I really think the interesting thing for us is the continuation of a lot of the trends we've seen before. It's the access to knowledge that we didn't even think that was possible, right? And making that, allowing that to be able to get down to the people who need it most wherever they are.
Thank you. So I know there's a lot of focus on AI at Vulcan and artificial general intelligence as well, which is a lot of people think is very far into the future. And AGI promises to solve everything from global poverty to cancer to whatever.
Yep.
Do you have like an idea on how that will happen? I mean, even though we don't have the technology, because it seems to me that every AI person I've ever talked to, it's just a dream, and no one has a clue how to do it.
I'm not worried. That's a great question. I don't think that, I'm not focused on the question of generalized intelligence. I think, where we're going to be able to make results, or you can see the biggest gains are in trying to solve lots of little local problems. I mean, look at the, 6 months ago we said, Google was telling us that it's going to take 10 years to be able to have a computer that's going to beat the grandmasters in Go. Right? And they were looking at this because they said, oh gosh, how much knowledge and how much planning and how much theory do we necessarily need to understand before we can unleash a computer against somebody like Lee? What we realized was by treating it as a local problem, trying to climb that little hill, we were able to make progress that we didn't even dream of. We've talked many, many times and said, wow, gosh, if we can understand how to count elephants, we can learn how to count rhinos, and we can learn how to count pretty much anything. I'm not banking on that kind of theory of generalization just at this point. What I'm trying to work on is trying to reduce the cost of trying to climb and take each of those little hills. And that if I can do that, then I can look around and say, gosh, I know a lot, and I can start extrapolating from one problem to the other. But the idea of actually moving from one problem to an analogous problem is a really hard theoretical challenge that we're not prepared to take on at this point. You'll hear people talk about transfer learning, and we'll talk about unsupervised learning, and we'll learn from sparse data. And those are the kind of challenges of our time. but we're not necessarily there yet. And so really what I want to focus on, and, in our group at Vulcan Technology, is to really understand what it takes for us to be able to solve a problem, solve it well, and have a repeatable methodology that allows us to go into any problem and say, yeah, we got this.
I'm so happy to see someone using drones for a purpose such as you were, other than that does not result in dead people. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's a cheerful note to end on.
On that note, I think you find there are a lot of people who are using them, and some people are even trying to rebrand them. I think IDEO did a great study that they called flying helpers, which is a little too cheesy to catch on, but I like calling them aerial robots.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.